about why we need a new national organisation to stand up for landlords, why government policy has caused the death of the small private landlord, and why more landlords are offering their properties for asylum seeker accommodation, with our special guest, Chairman of the Eastern Landlords Association. It's really great to have you on and to talk about some really popular landlord topics, particularly to do with asylum accommodation and also some of the huge legislation changes that are coming into the private rented sector as well. It'd be great to hear from yourself a little bit about how you became a landlord and how you joined the Eastern Landlords Association as well. And how did that all come about too?
Pleasure to be here. I became a landlord probably about 35 years ago. I thought it'd be a good idea. The only association available in those days was the Norwich Landlords Association, where there is about, I don't know, 10 or 11 local landlords who would talk about issues affecting them within that area. I joined that. My portfolio grew. Norwich Landlords became the Eastern Landlords Association, and we widened our net much further, and we've got members all over, and it's now a healthy, vibrant association. So that was the start of it, really.
That's really great to hear, and great to hear how it's grown and grown as well. And that's great to get your expertise as well, as you're a landlord yourself, so you definitely know what's going all in the sector and all what people are feeling as well. And going on to that as well, so the Eastern Landlords Association represents landlords in East Anglia. So how are landlords in East Anglia finding everything at the moment, particularly with all these legislative changes going on? Are they thinking of leaving the private rented sector? What's their feeling about the private rented sector at the moment?
I don't think East Anglia's landlords' views are unique. I think landlords across the country are now feeling that this particular business, this industry, has never been in such a parlous state, if you like. Being a landlord, you're demonised from the government right down to local authority. There's a massive housing shortage. Local authorities cannot supply that level of housing for people. So it always astounds me that this attitude they have towards the private rented sector is just causing an even more shortage. Homelessness is rising across the country. And I think it will carry on in this vein until government decides, local authorities decide that actually the private rented sector is vital to our housing needs.
Exactly. As you said there, it's really vital, but the government and local authority as well don't seem to be taking it seriously. And as you just said there as well, particularly, it's not just landlords in East Anglia that are feeling that it's the final nail in the coffin, I suppose, for them. It's also landlords across the United Kingdom as well. And going on to the Renters' Rights Bill in particular, do you think that that's pushing more landlords out of the sector now? Do you think a lot of landlords are actually saying, the Renters' Rights Bill is the final nail in the coffin for me, I'm just going to leave the sector?
I think it is. I mean, the age demographic of landlords in this country is sort of 50 plus, really. And I think a lot of those now, the smaller landlords, the majority of smaller landlords have between sort of 1 and 3 properties, are thinking now, right, enough's enough. I can't deal with this added burden, this added legislation. So now is the time to sell. And I speak to landlords every day, and this seems to be the common theme. This, of course, creates an even more shortage of available properties. And whenever there's a shortage of anything, prices go up. So I've read somewhere that the Renters' Rights Bill, or same as selective licensing, is a landlord tax. Actually, it isn't. It's a tenant tax, because like any other business, profitable business, efficient business, costs have to cascade down to the customer. And inevitable, it will be the tenant who suffers mostly, A, because they won't find anywhere to live, or B, they can't afford it.
Exactly. I think you just hit the nail on the head there, particularly with it being a tenant tax, because all these tenant groups, they advocate for things like selective licensing, as you say, but they don't actually realize that that's going to have a knock-on effect for them because the landlords is obviously going to have to put the price up because of these selective licensing schemes, as you say. I'm not sure. I think in Norwich they don't have a selective licensing scheme, but correct me if I'm wrong. But obviously, in other parts of the country, these selective licensing schemes are hugely expensive.
Yes, there are, and in certainly in Norfolk at the moment, the only scheme that's proposed yet again is by Great Yarmouth. They had a scheme some 6 years ago, which ran for 5 years. It was pretty pointless, frankly, and now they're in consultation to go towards the next scheme. This one is different in as much as there's not an expectation, there is that landlords will have to inspect their properties 4 times a year. So that's every 3 months, a tenant has got to put up with the invasion of their privacy. You're taking photographs, you're filling in forms, and it's actually, frankly, quite ridiculous. And it's nearly £800 per property. It's a Again, I think it's an act of a short-sighted, narrow-minded council that can't see the consequences of their actions. And I know certainly in that particular area, landlords, this is the final straw for them. They've just had enough of bureaucratic meddling.
Hmm. And that's obviously incredibly sad because obviously with these tenants, they're going to have nowhere to go, and we need good landlords to stay in the sector. But you were mentioning there about the selective licensing scheme in Great Yarmouth. And I know you've previously said that the introduction of selective licensing schemes, particularly in Great Yarmouth, is actually causing more landlords to offer their properties to Serco for asylum seeker accommodation. So are you actually seeing a trend in more landlords offering their properties to asylum seeker accommodation providers?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the government passed legislation quite recently to try and free up hotels so that the asylum seekers no longer stay in hotels. So they've offered Serco the contract to find housing for asylum seekers. Great Yarmouth is one of those areas. And I've actually suggested to the council that their scheme may well lead to um, landlords going down that route simply because it will then take away their dealings with the council. Landlords are fed up with the council and everything that they bring towards landlords. So an option may well be that go down the Serco route. I personally don't know the benefits of that yet. I am in talks with Serco about that to see what they can offer. It's an alternative, but again, that will mean a shortage of properties for local residents. But the only reason that we're making inquiries down that route is because of the proposed selective licensing route yet again.
That's really interesting to hear, like yourself as a landlord, you were obviously looking at Serco. Would I just be able to ask, like, why did you decide to like have a look at them? Was it just particularly like with the selective licensing scheme or
It was purely because of the selective licensing scheme. And I've emailed the members saying this could be an option if you choose. I mean, we're here to put options to landlords to decide which way they want to run their business, and the level of interest in that is yes is quite phenomenal, really. But again, it'll be at the loss to that council of available property for their locals.
exactly as you say, that's a complete loss for the tenants as well because they won't have anywhere to go. But that's really interesting to hear that more landlords are actually thinking of going down the asylum seeker route because on the Property 118 website, there's a lot of debate going on around on this topic at the moment. And some of the landlords are saying, well, it's a bit rich that because we did an article, sorry, on Property 118 that I think the government was actually asking private landlords at one point to say, like, can you house some of the asylum seekers? But a lot of landlords on our website were actually saying that's actually a bit rich that the government's actually asking this because they've just completely battered the private rented sector. So why should landlords actually help them?
Well, that's exactly that. Yeah, we're demonised, as I said, at government level,
Mm.
right down to local authority level. But now they've realised, oh, we need the private rented sector. So again, there's no joined up thinking, and there's no joined up thinking on the consequences of these actions. And as I said, it's not just Great Yarmouth; it's across the whole country. Circa have been given a government contract purely to find suitable housing for asylum seekers. Now, for every property that an asylum seeker takes, then that's one less property for someone in the local area to take. So again, they just haven't thought it through.
Exactly, as you say, there's no joined up thinking there at all. And we're obviously talking about the demonization of landlords, and the government basically just don't seem to be putting any investment whatsoever into the private rented sector. But as a landlord yourself, what do you want to see from the government to actually help keep good landlords in the private rented sector? As we've been saying, we really do need good landlords.
I don't think the government actually gives two hoots about private landlords. I really don't think they do, or they wouldn't have gone down the action or down the road that they have in demonising us. The rental right reform bill will cause landlords even more problems, in as much as I can't imagine once this bill is in place a landlord taking any tenant that doesn't have a guarantor. Section 21 is gone. And again, it's erroneously called the no fault eviction. And we all know that a landlord never evicts a good tenant for no reason. So you will need a guarantor. You will need the deposit. And again, that's making it even harder for people. Some people don't have guarantors. You don't have family or friends who will do that for you. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think that when the government sees the level of homelessness increasing even more than it is, maybe finally they will wake up and realise actually we really shouldn't have done this. But I fear it may be too late, too little, too late.
Mm. Which is such a shame. And as you just said, particularly there with the guarantors, and particularly we've done articles on Property 118 that for international students, they might just not have a guarantor. So obviously they're not going to be able to get some of these properties. So obviously it is a really bad situation at the moment. And moving on now, one article, as I was just saying before we started having a chat, I was saying to you that you did an article on the Property 118 website with one of my colleagues about, you said that you wanted a new national organisation to represent private landlords. Now, that got a lot of comments and debate going on the website. I was just wondering, do you still believe that there should be a new national organisation, and what should they do?
Right, yes, most definitely. We are the only business or industry that doesn't have, if you like, a union. We have no representation at government. The only national landlords association we have is become rapidly pointless. It has no voice. And you can tell it has no voice by the parlous state that the industry is in. Government just rides roughshod over anything. So there's no better time now than to have a national association that, instead of concentrating on selling, I don't know, mortgages and tenancy agreements and insurances and things like that, purely to lobby government in a robust way in order to get some change. We're actually in quite a powerful position at the moment simply because of the shortage of available property. And for instance, if every landlord across the country now said they will not deal with their local authority and accept any referrals from tenants for them, the problem would be huge. But until we get this voice, until we get an association that can stand up and be heard and have a media process. Shelter, every week, they are in the media. They are very media friendly. The National Landlords Association, you hardly ever see or hear from them. They have no media presence. And until that's changed, until we get a robust organisation, the government will continue to ride roughshod over us.
That's really interesting to hear your opinion there about that because, as you said, yeah, like these tenant organizations, particularly with shelter and generation rent as well, they have such they obviously have a really big membership, but they're incredibly active as well on social media. And also, I've been watching like the Renters' Rights Bill committee stages, and they're always there, usually having a go at landlords. And obviously, the NRLA, they don't seem to be doing that. So, do you think we actually need to be going down in some ways? More of the shelter and generation rent route and actually being more active, particularly on social media, and also actually saying sometimes if we see something in the media that says, oh, all landlords are greedy, fat cats taking all the money, actually, we need an organization that says, actually, no, that's not true.
That's exactly what we need. We need a head. We need a very small number of people who are media savvy, who can actually go before the camera and say, look, this isn't correct. It's this, this, and this. At the moment, the media are not interested in what landlords say because it's far easy. I mean, no tenant ever rings up the media and says, oh, my landlord is really good. It's not a story. They only want bad stuff. So the tenants associations only talk about the bad stuff. And if a landlord, an individual, wants to counter that, there's no place for it. So that should be the place for a national association with a national head, if you like, who can actually stand before the media and go, this is wrong, and it's time this was put right.
Mm. That's really, really great to hear your opinion there. And I definitely think a lot of landlords will actually agree with that as well. And now for my final question. I know it's a big question to ask, and you hinted at it a bit earlier, but what do you think of the future of the private rented sector?
I think the days are gone for the amateur landlord. As I said, if you've got one or two properties, or maybe three properties, which actually probably is the majority, and you'll probably have a full-time job as well, for you, and you manage it yourself, for you to keep up with the changes of legislation and everything that's required of you in order to manage that property and make it a comfortable home for your tenants is nigh on impossible. So I think it's going to be more, as we go forward, it'll be more of the landlords with the big portfolios, with maintenance teams behind them and an organisation to sort of help support all of that. That's the way I see the future. The days of, say, accidental landlords where, I don't know, there's been a death in the family and you've got this house, they'll sell it now instead of renting it out. And I actually think the abolition of Section 21 is going to be part of that, because if you've got two or three properties, you can't get the tenant out and they're not paying the rent, that could bankrupt you. And it's interesting, actually, that going back to that national association, they didn't rail against the abolition of Section 21, which I think is probably the worst thing that they could have done. So I think the future is good for professional landlords who can make it work and make the business viable.
Mm. Yeah, as you say that, I think unfortunately it seems to be the death of small landlords, unfortunately. And now you're getting obviously large institutional professional landlords that are taking over. And obviously those are actually more expensive for tenants compared to smaller private landlords. And sorry, just to touch on there as well that you said about the NRLA with the abolition of Section 21. I think I heard the chief executive, Ben Beadle, actually say that he actually supports the abolition of Section 21, I think.
I know. It's beyond belief, isn't it? That's the main. It's the most. It's the biggest part of that legislation that will affect landlords. And that the spokesman for the NRLA says they support it. It's unbelievable. How could they possibly have come to that conclusion? But again, I don't. Well, they don't represent professional landlords. It's as simple as that.
Mm. Well, I think that's the perfect way to end it on with a little bit of controversy, which we always like at Property 118. But thank you so much, Paul, for coming on today. A really, really interesting chat. And I'm sure we'll probably get a lot of comments from landlords about our chat today. But thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.